On the dusty edge of a forgotten Arizona town, a quiet single dad runs a humble roadside diner that barely makes enough to keep the lights on. But when a ruthless female cartel boss storms through his doors, mocking his struggle and demanding control of his business, she makes a fatal miscalculation. The man flipping burgers behind that counter isn't just another desperate restaurant owner trying to survive. He's the legendary Night Reaper, a name whispered in fear across 3 continents. A ghost from an elite past that powerful people paid fortunes to forget, and his resistance won't be fought with violence or intimidation, but with something far more devastating: precision, patience, and a strategic brilliance that turns her own empire against her. She came to destroy a diner. She's about to lose everything. Because some legends don't retire. They just wait for the right moment to remind the world exactly why they earned their name. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you. Make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The sun rose slow and golden over the hills of Ashford, Arizona, casting a soft amber glow across the cracked asphalt of Highway 89. The dust in the air shimmered like memory, caught between earth and sky. A weathered sign swung gently in the morning breeze outside a small roadside diner. Its paint faded but still readable. Grant's Place, home cooking since 2018. Inside, the diner smelled of fresh brewed coffee and sizzling bacon. The kind of smell that whispered home, not fancy but real. Worn vinyl booths lined the windows, their emerald green surfaces patched with duct tape in places where time had worn through. Behind the long counter stood a man who moved with quiet efficiency, who didn't say much because he didn't need to. Grant Sullivan was 38 years old, though the silver threading through his dark hair and the lines around his eyes made him look older. Not older from age, but from carrying weight that most people never had to lift. His blue-gray eyes, steady and clear, scanned the morning prep while he poured coffee into mismatched mugs that had been collected over the years from yard sales and thrift stores. He wore a simple black t-shirt and jeans, sleeves pushed up to reveal forearms marked with faded scars that looked like they had stories attached. Stories he never told. "Morning, Grant," called Wesley Armstrong, a 72-year-old Korean War veteran who always took the same stool, third from the left. His cane leaned against the counter beside him, a constant companion. "Morning, Wes," Grant replied, topping off his mug. "Coffee's hot. Eggs are on. World's still turning." "Evidence suggests you're correct," Wesley said with a wry smile. His weathered hands wrapped around the warm ceramic dot at the corner booth sat Faith Gilbert, a retired nurse who came in every Wednesday and Friday to work on her crossword puzzles in the morning light. Next to her sat Jasper Holt, a mechanic with grease permanently embedded under his fingernails, who ran the only auto shop within 30 miles. He sipped his coffee slowly, savoring each moment, before heading back to a day of wrestling with broken-down trucks. Behind the counter, working the register, was Lily Daniels. She was 23, studying online for her teaching certificate while working the morning shift. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she moved with the kind of nervous energy that comes from having too many responsibilities and not enough hours in the day. She kept glancing at the front door, a habit she'd picked up over the past 2 weeks ever since rumors started circulating about strangers asking questions around town. "Grant, orders are up," called a young voice from the kitchen. That was Bryce Chambers, 16 years old and rail-thin, working his first real job to save money for community college. Grant had hired him 3 months ago when the boy showed up asking if there was any work available, any work at all. Now Grant was teaching him more than just how to flip eggs and work a grill. He was teaching him that showing up mattered, that consistency built character, that small actions repeated daily created something larger than yourself. The old jukebox in the corner crackled to life. And Willie Nelson's voice filled the small space with, "On the road again." Grant smiled faintly. There was something holy about mornings like this, simple and slow and decent. Moments that felt both eternal and achingly fragile. He wiped down the counter without looking, his hands moving through the familiar motion like a meditation. Like a man whose muscle memory went deeper than anyone could see. Across from him, Lily leaned in, her voice dropping low. "You ever get the feeling like something's about to happen, but you can't name what it is?" She asked, not quite joking. Grant didn't answer right away. He just looked out the window, his expression unreadable. 3 black SUVs were rolling up the highway, dust clouds kicking up behind them like warning signs written in the desert air. "I do now," he said quietly. The vehicle slowed, then parked directly in front of the diner, engines rumbling low and aggressive. Every conversation in the room went still. Even Willie Nelson seemed to drop into silence. Doors opened. People stepped out. 6 of them, 4 men and 2 women. They moved with the kind of confidence that comes from never being told no, or if they had been, never listening. Tattoos snaked up their arms. Gold chains caught the sunlight. Their eyes scanned the diner like predators assessing prey, but it was the woman who emerged last who commanded attention. She was striking, probably in her mid-30s, with jet black hair pulled back tight and sharp features that could have been beautiful if they weren't so cold. She wore expensive boots, dark jeans, and a leather jacket despite the Arizona heat. Everything about her screamed power and control. They walked into Grant's place like they owned it, boots heavy on the worn linoleum floor. Grant didn't move. He simply watched as the woman approached the counter, scanned the place with barely concealed contempt, then looked directly at him. "You Grant Sullivan?" she asked, her accent carrying the rhythm of northern Mexico. "I am," Grant replied, his voice steady and calm. "Coffee?" The woman smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Sure, black, and for my friends too." Grant poured 7 mugs without breaking eye contact. He set them down carefully, one by one. The only sound in the suddenly silent diner, the gentle clink of ceramic on laminate. The woman sipped, then nodded once. "Not bad." She set the mug down with deliberate slowness. "My name is Erisa Darnell. I don't waste time with small talk, so I'll be direct." She leaned forward, her voice dropping just enough that everyone in the diner had to strain to hear. "This highway, this town, everything within 20 miles, it belongs to my organization now. That includes your little diner here. You're going to pay what I say. You're going to serve who I say. You're going to close when I say. And you're going to smile and be grateful for the privilege." Lily froze at the register, her hand trembling slightly. Faith looked up from her crossword, her expression hardening. Jasper's jaw clenched, one hand curling into a fist on the table. Wesley simply watched, his old soldier's eyes assessing the situation with the calm of someone who had seen worse. Grant didn't flinch. He met Erisa's stare with something that wasn't quite defiance and wasn't quite submission. It was something older, something harder to name. "I see," he said slowly. "You'll be wanting breakfast then." Erisa blinked, clearly not expecting that response. "I figure if you're planning on making threats all morning, you'll need something in your stomach," Grant continued, wiping the counter with the same steady rhythm. "We've got biscuits and gravy, eggs however you like them, bacon that's actually crispy. Might as well eat like people while you plan your takeover." Behind him, Bryce peeked out from the kitchen, eyes wide with fear. Grant gave him the slightest nod. "Stay calm. Don't react." Erisa stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she laughed, a sharp sound without humor. "You're either very brave or very stupid, old man," she said. "There's a thin line between the two," Grant replied, deadpan. "I walk it every morning at 5 a.m. when I start prep." One of Teresa's men, a broad-shouldered guy with a shaved head, chuckled despite himself. The tension cracked just slightly, like ice beginning to thaw. Erisa leaned back, still smiling that cold smile. "We'll be back tomorrow. Same time. And we'll expect to see some changes in your attitude." She drained her mug and set it down hard enough to make a point. Her crew followed suit, each placing their empty cups on the counter like soldiers following orders. They walked toward the door, boots echoing on the floor. Erisa paused at the threshold, looking back over her shoulder. "Enjoy your peace while it lasts, Mr. Sullivan, because it won't last long." The door swung shut behind them. The bell above it jingled cheerfully, absurdly out of place. Only once the SUVs disappeared down the highway, dust trailing behind them like smoke, did the diner breathe again. Only then did hands unclench, did shoulders relax, did whispered conversations begin. "Grant," Bryce whispered from the kitchen doorway. "Who were those people?" "People who mistake fear for respect," Grant said simply, pouring fresh coffee for Wesley. "Common mistake. What are we going to do?" Lily asked, her voice small and worried. Grant's eyes were far away now, looking at something none of them could see. Some distant memory or calculation playing out behind that calm exterior. "I'll think of something," he said quietly. "Think of something," he said quietly. But Wesley, who had known Grant longer than anyone else in that diner, who had watched him over the past 5 years since he'd arrived in Ashford with nothing but a duffel bag and a haunted look in his eyes, Wesley saw something shift in his friend's expression. Something cold and precise sliding into place behind the warmth. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. And Wesley, old soldier that he was, recognized it for exactly what it was: the calm before action. The stillness before the storm. That evening, after the last customer had left and the chairs were stacked on tables, after Lily had gone home and Bryce had caught his ride, after Wesley had limped out to his old pickup with a knowing look and a quiet, "Be careful, son," Grant locked the front door and flipped the sign to closed. The diner settled into that particular kind of silence that comes after a long day, when the building itself seems to exhale. The setting sun cast long shadows through the windows, painting everything in shades of amber and rust. Grant stood at the counter for a long moment, just breathing, just being still. Then he moved. He walked to the back office, a cramped space barely large enough for a desk and a filing cabinet. The walls were covered with framed photos, moments captured and preserved. There was one of his son, Parker, age 7, gap-toothed and grinning, holding up a fishing rod with a tiny perch dangling from the line. Another showed Parker at his elementary school graduation just last month, standing tall in a shirt too big for his thin frame, trying so hard to look grown-up. Grant's chest tightened looking at those photos. Parker was staying with his grandmother in Tucson during the summer, arrangement that kept him safe and gave Grant the space to work the long hours the diner demanded. But every night without his son felt like a small failure, a reminder of everything that had gone wrong, of all the reasons Grant had ended up here in the middle of nowhere, trying to build something simple and clean and good. He shook his head, pushing the thoughts away. Not now, not tonight. Grant knelt beside the filing cabinet and pulled out the bottom drawer. It stuck as always, requiring a firm jerk to get it open. Inside were folders full of receipts and tax documents and supplier invoices. The mundane paperwork of running a small business. But at the very back, hidden behind a false panel that looked like the drawer's rear wall, was a space. A hollow maybe 8 inches deep. Grant reached in and pulled out a wooden box. It was simple, made of dark walnut, about the size of a shoebox. The wood was worn smooth from handling, from being opened and closed countless times over the years. He carried it back to the front counter and set it down under the dim overhead lights. For a moment he just looked at it, his hands resting on either side, not quite touching. Then he opened it. Inside, wrapped in black cloth, was a collection of items that didn't belong in a roadside diner. A set of identification cards, each with his photo, but different names, different backgrounds, different lives. Passport stamps from countries most people had never heard of. A small black notebook filled with entries written in a code only he could read. And beneath those, carefully folded, was a piece of fabric. Black, lightweight, made from advanced synthetic material. When Grant unfolded it, the shape became clear. A balaclava, a face covering designed to leave only the eyes visible, but it wasn't just any mask. Across the lower portion, where the mouth would be hidden, someone had embroidered a design in white thread. A stylized reaper's scythe, curved and sharp. Grant stared at it, his expression unreadable. His thumb traced the embroidery slowly, almost unconsciously. Night Reaper. That's what they had called him. Not him exactly, but the persona, the ghost, the shadow that moved through places where shadows weren't supposed to exist. For 8 years he had been that ghost, working for people who needed problems solved quietly, permanently, without trace or evidence or consequence. He had been very, very good at it. Good enough that his reputation became currency in certain circles. Good enough that powerful people paid extraordinary amounts of money to make him go away, to convince him to retire, to ensure he would never work again, and he had taken the money. Every cent of it, because by then he had a son. By then he had realized that Parker deserved better than a father who disappeared for weeks at a time and came back with new scars and old nightmares. So Grant Sullivan had become exactly that, just Grant Sullivan. He had taken his payout, moved to Ashford, bought this failing diner, and tried to become someone his son could be proud of. Someone simple and decent and present. But the box remained. The mask remained. The skills remained, buried but not gone, dormant but not dead. Grant refolded the mask carefully and placed it back in the box. He looked at the identification cards, each one a ghost of a person he used to be. Then he picked up one particular card, studied the photo of himself from 10 years ago, younger and harder. Eyes that didn't smile even when his mouth did. "I'm not that person anymore," he whispered to the empty diner. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't quite true. You don't stop being what you were. You just choose, every day, whether to let it define you. Grant closed the box, locked it, and returned it to its hiding place behind the false panel. He locked the office, turned off all but one light in the front, and stood at the window looking out at the desert night. Somewhere out there, Erisa Dornell was planning her next move. Somewhere out there, dangerous people were making calculations about how much pressure to apply, how quickly to crush this small resistance, how to make an example that would keep everyone else in line. They thought they knew what they were dealing with. A struggling single dad, a man barely keeping his business afloat, someone desperate and vulnerable and easily intimidated. Thought they had no idea. And that, Grant knew, was going to be their biggest mistake. He pulled out his phone and typed a short text message to Wesley. "Tomorrow morning. Keep Parker in Tucson for a few more weeks. I'll explain later." Then he sent another message, this one to a number he hadn't contacted in 3 years. A number that probably wasn't even active anymore. "It's Sullivan. Need information. Erisa Dornell, Cartel Operations, Arizona Corridor. Whatever you have." He didn't expect a response. But 5 minutes later, his phone buzzed. A single word appeared. Confirmed. Grant allowed himself the smallest smile. The network still existed. The ghosts were still watching. He locked up the diner and walked to his truck, an old Ford that had seen better decades. The engine coughed to life, and he drove the 10 minutes to his small rental house on the edge of town. A 2-bedroom place with a porch that sagged, and a yard that was mostly dirt and determination. Inside, he made himself a simple dinner, chicken and rice, eating at the small kitchen table in silence. He washed his dishes, dried them, put them away. He checked the locks on the doors and windows, a habit he couldn't break no matter how many years passed. Then he sat on the couch in the dark living room and let himself think. Really think. About what was coming. About what choices he was going to have to make. About whether it was possible to protect what he'd built without becoming what he'd left behind. Outside, the Arizona night was vast and empty and full of stars. And somewhere in that darkness, gears were already turning, wheels set in motion, the careful machinery of information and strategy beginning to move. The Night Reaper might have retired. But Grant Sullivan was about to remember exactly why that name had once been whispered in fear. The next morning dawned too quiet. The usual sounds of the desert waking up. The birds and insects and distant highway traffic all seemed muted somehow. As if the world itself was holding its breath. Grant arrived at the diner at 4:30 in the morning, same as always. The pre-dawn darkness wrapped around everything like a blanket, and the only light came from the single bulb he kept. Burning over the back door dot, he moved through his routine with mechanical precision. Turned on the coffee maker. Started prep on the biscuit dough. Set bacon to cook on the flat-top grill. Every action familiar. Every movement practiced thousands of times until it required no thought at all. But his mind was elsewhere. It was running through scenarios, calculating variables, assessing resources and weaknesses and potential moves in a game that most people didn't even know they were playing. At 5:15, his phone buzzed. A message from the number he'd contacted last night. This time it wasn't just a word. It was a file, encrypted, sent through channels that didn't officially exist. Grant downloaded it to a burner tablet he kept hidden in his truck. Then he sat in his office, door closed, and began to read. Arisa Dornell. Age 34. Born in Culiacan, Sinaloa. Daughter of a mid-level cartel enforcer who got ambitious and paid the price when she was 12. Raised by an aunt who ran protection rackets along the border. Smart, ruthless, patient. Started working the family business at 16. By 25, she'd carved out her own territory through a combination of strategic violence and careful alliance building. Unlike many of her competitors, Arisa didn't rely purely on intimidation. She understood economics, supply chains, leverage points. She identified corridors that larger cartels ignored, smaller highways and back roads that could be exploited without drawing attention from the major players or federal authorities. Highway 89 through Ashford was one of those corridors. Remote enough to avoid scrutiny, trafficked enough to be profitable. She'd been slowly buying up property along the route, putting pressure on business owners, building infrastructure for moving product north and money south. The file included photos. Arisa at various locations, always surrounded by her crew. One photo showed her outside what looked like a warehouse, checking her phone while bodies were loaded into a van behind her. Another showed her at an upscale restaurant in Phoenix, laughing with men in expensive suits who were almost certainly corrupt officials, but it was the financial information that told the real story. Shell companies, offshore accounts, networks of legitimate businesses that laundered money from the illegal operations. It was sophisticated, layered, designed to be untraceable, except nothing was truly untraceable. Not if you knew where to look. Not if you had the skills to follow the threads back to their source. Grant studied the information for 40 minutes, committing key details to memory. Names, locations, patterns. Then he deleted the file, factory reset the tablet, and smashed it with a hammer before throwing the pieces in 3 different dumpsters around town. By 6 a.m., he was back behind the counter as Lily arrived for her shift. She looked tired, dark circles under her eyes suggesting she hadn't slept well. "Morning," she said quietly. "Morning," Grant replied, pouring her a coffee without asking. "You okay?" She nodded, not convincingly. "Just worried about yesterday. About those people." "They're bullies," Grant said simply. Bullies rely on fear. Once you see through that, they're just people making bad choices. But what if they come back? What if they hurt someone? Grant met her eyes, his expression serious but calm. I won't let that happen. I promise you. There was something in the way he said it, some absolute certainty in his voice, that made Lily believe him. She nodded, taking a sip of her coffee, and began setting up for the morning rush. Wesley arrived at 7, taking his usual stool. Jasper came in 10 minutes later. Faith showed up with her crossword book. Slowly, carefully, the diner filled with its regulars, people who had nowhere else to go, who needed this small pocket of normalcy in their lives. And then, right at 8 o'clock, the black SUVs returned. 3 of them, just like yesterday. They parked in the exact same positions, engines rumbling. Everyone in the diner went silent. Coffee cups paused halfway to lips. Conversations died mid-sentence. The doors opened. The same crew emerged. And Arissa Dornell stepped out last, wearing different clothes, but the same cold expression. They walked in, and this time there was no pretense of pleasantness. Arissa strode directly to the counter and leaned across it, invading Grant's space deliberately. Have you thought about my offer? She asked, her voice low and dangerous. I have, Grant replied calmly. And my answer is no. Arissa's eyes narrowed. You're making a mistake. Maybe, Grant said. But it's my mistake to make. One of her men, the broad-shouldered one from yesterday, stepped forward. Boss, you want me to teach him some manners? Arissa held up a hand, stopping him. She was still looking at Grant, studying him with new intensity. You know what I think? She said slowly. I think you're not as scared as you should be. I think there's something you're not telling me. Grant didn't respond. He just held her gaze, steady and unblinking. Who are you really, Grant Sullivan? Arissa asked. Because this, she gestured around the diner, this doesn't add up. A man running a failing diner in the middle of nowhere, refusing an offer from someone like me. That's either stupid or suicidal. Or maybe, Grant said quietly, I'm just someone who's tired of running. The words hung in the air between them. Arissa's expression shifted slightly, something like recognition flickering in her eyes. You ran from something, she said. Something bad enough that you ended up here. Grant didn't confirm or deny. He simply said, everyone's running from something. Arissa leaned back, a slow smile spreading across her face. Interesting. She turned to her crew. Boys, I think Mr. Sullivan needs some time to reconsider. Let's help him understand the situation better. The broad-shouldered man grabbed a salt shaker from the nearest table and threw it against the wall, where it shattered. Another man swept his arm across a booth, sending sugar dispensers and napkin holders crashing to the floor. Lily gasped. Bryce came running from the kitchen, but Grant barked, Stay back! Wesley started to stand, but Grant caught his eye and shook his head fractionally. Not now, not yet. The destruction was methodical, calculated. Not enough to really damage anything, just enough to make a point. Arissa watched it all with satisfaction, her arms crossed. Then she walked over to where Faith sat, frozen in her booth, crossword book clutched in trembling hands. You come here often? Arissa asked conversationally. Faith nodded, unable to speak. Well, that might not be safe anymore, Arissa said. You understand? Places like this, when they don't cooperate, bad things can happen. Accidents, fires, people getting hurt. She let the implication hang in the air. Then she turned back to Grant. 24 hours, she said. That's what you get. Tomorrow morning, I come back, and either you agree to my terms or we escalate. And trust me, Mr. Sullivan, you don't want escalation. She snapped her fingers, and her crew followed her out. The SUVs roared to life and pulled away, leaving dust and threat and fear hanging in the morning air. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Faith started crying quietly, her hands shaking. Jasper stood and began picking up the broken items. Lily rushed over to comfort Faith. Grant came out from behind the counter and knelt beside the older woman's booth. "Faith, look at me," he said gently. She met his eyes, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "You're safe here," Grant said. "I promise you. Whatever happens, you're safe." "How can you promise that?" She whispered. "Those people, they're dangerous." "I know," Grant said. "But so am I." It was said so quietly that only Faith heard it. But the absolute certainty in his voice, the cold precision in his eyes in that moment, made her believe him. The morning continued, but everything had changed. The easy warmth of Grant's place had been replaced with tension and fear. Customers who came in for their usual breakfast took one look at the atmosphere and left quickly. The lunch rush never materialized. By 2 o'clock, Grant closed early. He sent Lily and Bryce home with full pay and promises that everything would be okay. Wesley lingered, sitting at the counter while Grant cleaned. "You're going to do something," Wesley said. It wasn't a question. Grant kept wiping the counter. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." Wesley took a sip of coffee. "I was Special Forces, Grant. Long time ago, different war. But I recognize the signs. I've seen that look before. You're not a restaurant owner who used to be something. You're something that's been pretending to be a restaurant owner." Grant stopped wiping. He looked at his old friend, this man who had been kind to him from the first day he arrived in Ashford, who had never asked questions, who had simply accepted him. "I can't talk about it," Grant said finally. "Don't need you to," Wesley replied. "Just need you to know that whatever you're planning, you're not alone. This town, these people, we look out for each other. And that includes you." Grant felt something tighten in his chest, some emotion he'd been keeping locked away. "I appreciate that. But this is my fight." "No," Wesley said firmly. "It's not. The moment she threatened Faith, the moment she smashed up your place, it became everyone's fight. You might have special skills, whatever they are. But you can't do this alone." Grant started to argue, then stopped. Because Wesley was right. The Night Reaper had always worked alone, had always been a ghost operating in isolation. But Grant Sullivan wasn't the Night Reaper anymore. He was part of a community, part of something larger than himself, and that changed everything. "Okay," Grant said quietly. "Then I'm going to need your help. All of you." Wesley smiled grimly. "Just tell us what to do." That night, Grant didn't go straight home. Instead, he drove 20 miles out of town to a storage unit he rented under a different name. Paid for with cash, visited maybe twice a year. He opened the roll-in door and flipped on the battery-powered lantern inside. The space was small, 10 by 10, and mostly empty except for a few boxes stacked in the back. Grant pulled out one box and opened it. Inside were burner phones, still in their packaging, portable hard drives, cash in various denominations, and a laptop, old but functional, equipped with specialized software that didn't appear in any commercial catalog. He spent 3 hours in that storage unit, working by the light of the lantern, fingers moving across the keyboard with practice speed. He was mapping Eris's network, identifying her properties, her accounts, her associates. Every piece of information from the file he'd received was being cross-referenced, expanded, connected to other data points. By midnight, he had a picture. Not complete, but enough. Enough to start building a strategy. Enough to identify pressure points and vulnerabilities. The Night Reaper had been a tool of violence, quick and final. But Grant Sullivan was going to be something different. He was going to dismantle Eris's operation piece by piece, systematically, without ever throwing a punch or firing a shot. He was going to use her own infrastructure against her. He was going to make her empire collapse from within while she watched helplessly. Because that's what you did when you couldn't be the monster anymore but still needed to fight the monsters. You got smarter. You got more precise. You turned their weapons into their weaknesses. Grant closed the laptop, packed everything carefully away, and locked the storage unit. He drove home through the empty desert night, his mind already 3 steps ahead, already planning tomorrow. Erisa Dornell had given him 24 hours. She thought that was a threat. She didn't realize it was exactly the time he needed. The hunt had begun. And this time, the prey had no idea they were already caught. The next morning came too fast and too slow at the same time. Grant opened the diner at 5 a.m. as always, but this time the atmosphere was different. This time he wasn't alone. Wesley arrived first, at 5:30, earlier than his usual time. He took his stool and said nothing, just sipped his coffee and watched Grant work with the quiet solidarity of someone who had been in foxholes before, who understood that some battles required nothing more than presence. Jasper came in at 6, nominally to grab breakfast before opening his shop, but really to sit near the window where he could see the highway. Faith arrived shortly after, her crossword book under her arm, but her eyes sharp and alert. Even Lily showed up 30 minutes before her shift, claiming she couldn't sleep and might as well be useful. By 7:30, the diner had more people than usual for a Thursday morning. Word had spread through the small community, the way it always does in towns where everyone knows everyone. People came not because they were hungry, but because they understood that sometimes standing together was the only defense against forces that wanted to pick you off one by one. Grant moved through the morning routine, flipping eggs and pouring coffee, but his mind was running through calculations. He had spent the night implementing the first phase of his plan, setting digital tripwires and alerts, beginning the careful work of mapping Erisa's financial infrastructure. Now he just needed to buy time. At exactly 8 o'clock, the black SUVs arrived. 3 vehicles, same as before. But this time when they parked, more people got out. 8 instead of 6. Erisa was bringing reinforcements, making sure Grant understood the imbalance of power. They walked in, and immediately the atmosphere shifted. Erisa scanned the room, taking in the increased number of customers, the way everyone had positioned themselves strategically, the quiet defiance in their faces. Her expression hardened. "Interesting," she said, her voice carrying across the silent diner. "You brought friends." Grant stood behind the counter, arms crossed, his posture relaxed but his eyes alert. They were already here. People come for breakfast. It's what diners do. Erisa walked slowly toward the counter, her crew fanning out behind her. One of them, a lean man with a neck tattoo, moved toward Wesley. Another positioned himself near the kitchen door where Bryce was visible, frozen with a spatula in his hand. "I gave you 24 hours to make a smart decision," Erisa said, stopping directly in front of Grant. "Time's up. So what's it going to be? You going to cooperate, or do we need to make this unpleasant?" "I'm not interested in your offer," Grant said calmly. "This is my place. These are my people. And you need to leave." The man with the neck tattoo laughed. "You hear this guy? Acting tough with 8 of us standing here." Erisa held up a hand, silencing him. She was still studying Grant with that intense focus, like she was trying to solve a puzzle that didn't quite fit together. "You're not scared," she said quietly. "You should be, but you're not. Why?" "Maybe I'm just stubborn," Grant replied. "No." Erisa leaned forward, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "I've seen stubborn. I've broken stubborn. You're something else. You're calm. Like you know something I don't." Grant didn't respond, but something flickered in his eyes, just for a moment. And Erisa caught it. "You've done this before," she said, realization dawning. "Not this exactly, but something like it. You've faced down dangerous people before." "Lady, I've faced down health inspectors and IRS audits," Grant said. "Everyone's dangerous when they want to be." But Erisa wasn't buying it anymore. She pulled out her phone and tapped a few times, then held it up showing Grant a photo. It was grainy, taken from a distance, but it showed a man in tactical gear, face obscured by a black mask with a white design across the lower portion. A scythe. Grant's expression didn't change, but inside, alarms were going off. Where had she gotten that photo? That operation was supposed to be erased from every database, every record, every memory. "I've been asking around about you," Erisa said softly. "Making calls to people who know people. And a funny thing happened. Your name kept coming up connected to another name. A nickname, really. The Night Reaper." The diner went absolutely silent. Even the coffee maker seemed to stop hissing. "At first, I thought it was a coincidence," Erisa continued. "But then I started putting pieces together. A man who shows up in a small town 5 years ago with cash to buy a failing business. A man who keeps to himself, doesn't talk about his past, has skills that don't match his resume. A man who doesn't flinch when threatened by people who make their living through fear." She lowered her phone, her smile cold and triumphant. "You're him. You're the ghost everyone thought disappeared. The man governments paid millions to make go away because you knew too much, had done too much." She laughed, a sharp sound. "And here you are, flipping burgers in Arizona." Grant's jaw tightened. This was escalating faster than he'd anticipated. He'd known his past might surface eventually, but he'd hoped for more time, more preparation. Wesley spoke up from his stool. "Don't know what nonsense you're talking about, but Grant's been nothing but decent to this town. Whatever wild stories you've heard, they got nothing to do with who he is now." Erisa glanced at Wesley, amused. "Old man, I don't need you to defend him. In fact, knowing who he really is makes this much more interesting." She turned back to Grant. "See, now I understand why you're not scared. You think you can handle us because you used to handle worse. But here's the thing, Mr. Night Reaper or whatever you call yourself now, those skills are old. You're old. And I'm not some terrorist cell or rogue operation you can just eliminate quietly in the dark." She stepped even closer, her voice hardening. "I have resources. I have networks. I have people in law enforcement, in government, everywhere that matters. You make one move against me, and I don't just come after you. I come after everyone here." She gestured around the diner. "Your old man friend there. The girl at the register. That kid in the kitchen who's about to wet himself. Every single person who's ever been nice to you in this pathetic little town." Grant's hands were flat on the counter, and for the first time, the people who knew him saw something change in his face. Not fear, but something colder. Something that made the temperature in the room seem to drop. "You're making threats against people under my protection," he said quietly. "That's a mistake." "A mistake?" Erisa laughed. "You're one man, Sullivan. One tired, washed-up former operator trying to play at being normal. I'm an organization. You can't fight an organization." "You'd be surprised what one person can do," Grant said. "Especially when they have nothing left to lose. But you do have something to lose." Erisa pulled out her phone again and swiped to a new photo. This one showed a boy, maybe 8 years old, getting into a car outside a house in Tucson. Parker, Grant's eyes went dead. Completely, utterly dead. And everyone in the room who knew anything about violence recognized that look. It was the look that came before something terrible happened. "Where did you get that?" Grant's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried more menace than any shout could have. "I told you, I have resources," Erisa said. "Your son, Parker, right? Staying with his grandmother while Daddy works hard at his little diner. Such a sweet setup. Would be a shame if something happened to disrupt that." Wesley stood up from his stool, his cane gripped tight. Jasper moved toward the counter. Faith's hands were shaking, but she was reaching into her purse. Even Lily, scared as she was, positioned herself between the kitchen and Erisa's men. The community was moving. Instinctively, to stand with Grant, but Grant held up one hand, stopping them. "Everyone sit down," he said quietly. "This doesn't involve you." "The hell it doesn't," Wesley growled. "Sit down." Grant's voice carried command now, the voice of someone who had led operations in places where hesitation meant death. Wesley, old soldier that he was, recognized the tone and reluctantly sat. Grant turned his full attention to Arisa. "You just crossed a line you can't uncross. Is that right?" Arisa smirked. "What are you going to do about it? You lay one hand on me, on any of my people, and my organization comes down on this entire town like a hammer. Your son becomes an orphan. These people," she gestured around, "they lose everything. That's the reality, Sullivan. You're trapped." "No," Grant said softly. "You are." Something in the way he said it made Arisa's confidence waver, just slightly. "What's that supposed to mean?" Grant pulled out his phone and set it on the counter, screen facing up. "While you were busy trying to intimidate me and finding that old photo, I was busy too. See, the thing about being the Night Reaper wasn't just about being good at what I did. It was about being thorough. About understanding systems, networks, vulnerabilities. He tapped his phone once. 3 hours ago, I sent a very detailed file to 5 different federal agencies. ATF, DIA, FBI, FinCEN, and ICE. That file contains complete financial records of your operation. Every shell company, every offshore account, every property purchase, every single transaction you've made in the last 6 years. Arisa's face went pale. "You're bluffing, am I?" Grant swiped his phone, showing her a screen. It displayed confirmation receipts, case numbers, agent contact information. I also sent copies to 3 investigative journalists who specialize in cartel operations. And I uploaded encrypted versions to several secure servers with dead man switches. If anything happens to me, to my son, to anyone in this town, those files go public. Fully public. Every name, every transaction, every corrupt official you've ever paid off." The silence in the diner was absolute. Arisa stared at the phone, her mind clearly racing, trying to figure out if this was real, if he could possibly have done what he claimed. "You're insane," she whispered. "If those files go public, you expose yourself too. Your real identity, everything you've done." "I know," Grant said calmly. "And I accepted that the moment you threatened my son. See, I was trying to leave that life behind. Trying to be someone better, someone he could be proud of. But you made me realize something. I can't run from what I was. I can only choose how I use it." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more threat than any shout. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave this diner. You're going to leave this town. You're going to pull all your operations off Highway 89, and you're going to forget we ever existed. Because if you don't, if you come back, if you even think about my son or these people again, I won't just expose your operation. I'll dismantle it. Piece by piece. Transaction by transaction. Account by account. I'll take everything you've built, and I'll burn it to the ground while you watch." Arisa's hands were trembling now, with rage or fear or both. "You think federal agencies will protect you? You think anyone cares about one diner in the middle of nowhere?" "No," Grant said. "But they care about taking down a major cartel operation. They care about arrests and headlines and political wins. You're about to become very valuable to them. The question is whether you become valuable as a cooperating witness who helps them take down bigger players, or as a trophy they parade in front of cameras." He straightened, his expression cold and final. "Clock's ticking, Arisa. Every second you stand here, more people are reading those files. More connections are being made. More evidence is being logged. You came here to take over my diner. Instead, you just lost your entire operation. So I suggest you start figuring out your next move. Because your time just ran out. Erisa stared at him. Her jaw clenched, her eyes burning with rage and something else. Something that looked almost like respect. This isn't over, she said. Yes, Grant replied quietly. It is, you just don't know it yet. Erisa turned sharply and strode toward the door. Her crew followed, confused and uncertain, looking to their boss for guidance. As they reached the entrance, Erisa paused and looked back. You just made the biggest mistake of your life, she said. No, Grant said. You did when you threatened people I care about. The Night Reaper killed people. Grant Sullivan protects them. And I'm very, very good at both. The door slammed shut. The SUVs roared to life and tore out of the parking lot, spraying gravel and dust. For a long moment, nobody in the diner moved. Then Wesley let out a long, shaky breath. Grant, he said quietly, what exactly did you just do? Grant's shoulders sagged slightly, the tension draining out of him. What I had to. Lily's voice was small and uncertain. Are we safe? Is she really going to leave us alone? For now, Grant said. But I need to make some calls. I need to make sure those files actually land in the right hands, and that they take action quickly. The faster the federal agencies move, the less time Erisa has to retaliate. Faith stood up, walked to the counter, and placed her weathered hand over Grant's. You protected us, she said simply. Whatever you were before, whatever name they called you, you're a good man now. Grant looked at her, and for the first time that morning, his expression softened. I hope so, Faith. I really hope so. Jasper cleared his throat. So what now? Grant took a deep breath. Now we wait. We stay alert. We stick together. And we hope that I played this right. He looked around at the faces of the people who had become his community, his family, the reason he'd tried so hard to leave his past behind. They were scared, but they were here. They had stood with him when they could have run. Thank you, he said quietly. All of you. For not leaving when you had the chance. Wesley raised his coffee cup. This is our town too, Grant. You're not the only one worth fighting for. Others raised their cups in silent agreement. And in that moment, in that small diner in the middle of nowhere, Arizona, something shifted. They weren't just customers anymore. They were a community that had been tested and had chosen to stand together. Grant returned to the kitchen, moving on autopilot, starting the day's work because work was what you did, no matter what. But his mind was already 3 steps ahead, already planning, already preparing for whatever came next. Because he knew Erisa. He knew people like her. And he knew that what had just happened wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something much more dangerous. The question was whether Grant Sullivan could win this fight without becoming the Night Reaper again, without losing the man he'd fought so hard to become. And honestly, he wasn't sure he knew the answer. For 3 days, nothing happened. The black SUVs didn't return. No threats came. The diner operated normally, or as normally as it could, with everyone jumping at sudden noises and watching the highway, like sentries on duty. But Grant wasn't idle. He was making moves that nobody else could see, setting pieces in motion across a board that stretched far beyond Ashford. On the first day, he made contact with Agent Sarah Chun at the D. She was someone he'd worked with tangentially years ago. Back when he was the Night Reaper and government sometimes needed problems solved that couldn't be solved through official channels. She owed him, not that debts meant much in that world, but she at least answered his encrypted call. This is extremely irregular, she said after he'd explained the situation. You're a civilian now. You can't just hand us a case and expect us to jump. The files are real, Grant said. Everything you need to take down a major distribution network along the southern corridor. Names, dates, transactions, properties. It's all verified. All you have to do is act on it. There was a long pause. Why are you doing this? What's your angle? Protection, Grant said simply. For people who don't deserve to be caught in the crossfire. Another pause. I'll look at the files. If they're as good as you say, we might be able to move on it. But Sullivan, you know how this works. Even if we act fast, it takes time to build a case, get warrants, coordinate raids. You're looking at weeks, maybe months. I don't have weeks, Grant said. Can you at least put surveillance on Eris's known locations? Make her aware that she's being watched? That might buy me time. Agent Chun sighed. I can probably arrange that. But you're playing a dangerous game. If she figures out you're the one who exposed her before we can move, she'll come after you hard. Let her come, Grant said, and ended the call. On the second day, he worked the financial angle. Using skills he'd hoped never to use again, he accessed offshore banking systems that officially didn't exist, and began the careful work of freezing Eris's liquid assets. Not stealing them, that would be too obvious. Just tying them up in bureaucratic red tape, triggering compliance reviews and suspicious activity, reports that would take weeks to untangle. Every restaurant payment that bounced, every wire transfer that got delayed, every cash flow interruption added pressure to Eris's operation. Criminal enterprises ran on cash flow just like legitimate businesses. Disrupt that flow and everything downstream started to crumble. He worked from his storage unit, hunched over the laptop, fingers flying across keys, diving into systems that would have terrified most hackers. But Grant had been trained by people who built these systems, who knew every backdoor and vulnerability. By the end of the second day, he'd locked up roughly 40% of Eris's accessible money. Not enough to cripple her, but enough to hurt, to make her scramble. To divide her attention between the diner problem and the bigger problem of keeping her operation funded. On the third day, he expanded the strategy. He began leaking information to Eris's competitors, other cartels and criminal organizations that would be very interested to know that she was under federal investigation, that her finances were exposed, that she was vulnerable. In the underworld, weakness was blood in the water. Sharks came fast. He did this carefully, anonymously, through channels that couldn't be traced back to him. A tip here, a rumor there. Carefully planted suggestions that Eris Adorno was either cooperating with authorities or had been compromised. In their world, either scenario was a death sentence. Wesley watched this transformation with something between awe and concern. Grant still worked the diner every day, still cooked breakfast and poured coffee and made small talk with customers. But there were hours when he disappeared into the back office, emerged with red-rimmed eyes and tension in his shoulders. "You're not sleeping," Wesley observed on the morning of the fourth day. Grant shrugged, pouring coffee. "Sleep's overrated. Son, I've been where you are. I know what it's like to go to war, even a quiet one. It eats at you. I'm fine, Wes." "No, you're not. You're slipping back into old patterns, old ways of thinking. And I'm worried that when this is over, if it ever is, you won't be able to find your way back to who you were trying to become." Grant stopped wiping the counter and looked at his friend. Really looked at him. What if who I was trying to become was never really possible? What if this, he gestured vaguely, was always temporary? "Don't say that," Wesley said firmly. "You're not defined by your worst moments or your most dangerous skills. You're defined by the choices you make when you don't have to make them. And you're choosing to protect people. That matters." Before Grant could respond, his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Come alone." 2 p.m., Old Water Tower on Route 12. It was unsigned, but Grant knew exactly who it was from. Erisa. He showed the message to Wesley, who frowned. "It's a trap." "Probably," Grant agreed. "So you're not going?" "I have to. If she wants to talk, it means my strategy is working." She's feeling the pressure and wants to negotiate. Or she wants to put a bullet in your head. Grant smiled grimly. She could do that anytime. She knows where I live, where I work. If she wanted me dead, I'd be dead. No, this is something else. Then let me come with you. Or Jasper, someone. She said alone. If I show up with backup, she know I don't trust the situation, and it'll escalate. Better to hear what she has to say, and if it is a trap. Grant's expression went cold and distant. Then she'll learn why people used to call me the Night Reaper. At 1:30 that afternoon, Grant closed the diner early, claiming equipment maintenance. He made sure Lily, Bryce, and the regulars were gone before he left. Only Wesley remained, watching from the window as Grant climbed into his truck. Be careful, Wesley called. Grant nodded and drove away. The old water tower was about 15 miles outside Ashford. Down a dirt road that nobody used anymore since the new wells had been drilled. It was isolated, exposed, exactly the kind of place you'd choose for a meeting if you wanted to make sure the other person wasn't bringing hidden backup. Grant arrived 10 minutes early and parked his truck in a weak position where he could leave quickly if needed. He got out and walked to the base of the tower, positioning himself where he had clear sight lines in all directions. At exactly 2 o'clock, a single black SUV approached, driving slowly. It stopped about 50 yards away, and Arisa got out. She was alone, or at least appeared to be. She walked toward Grant with her hands visible. No weapons drawn. They stood facing each other in the desert heat. Two people who understood violence and strategy, and the cost of both. You've been busy, Arisa said without preamble. So have you, Grant replied. My accounts are frozen. My shipments are being delayed. My competitors are circling. And federal agents are suddenly very interested in properties I own. She tilted her head. You did all that in 3 days? I told you I would. I didn't believe you could. I thought you were bluffing, that you'd handed over some basic intel, and were hoping it would scare me. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. I underestimated you. That's rare. I don't usually underestimate people. What do you want, Arisa? She pulled out a pack of cigarettes, lit one, took a long drag. I want to understand you. The Night Reaper was a legend. A ghost. Someone who killed efficiently and disappeared. But you're not killing anyone now. You're dismantling my operation using financial forensics and digital warfare. That's not the same person. People change, do they? She studied him. Or do they just find new ways to be what they always were? Grant didn't answer. Arisa blew out smoke, watching it dissipate in the desert air. I have a proposal. I'm listening. You stop. You stop whatever you're doing to my operation. You stop feeding information to federal agencies. You stop interfering. And in exchange, I leave you alone. I leave this town alone. I move my operations to a different corridor, and we never cross paths again. And I'm supposed to trust you? No, she said honestly. But you're supposed to be smart enough to recognize a good deal. You've hurt me, I'll admit that. But you haven't destroyed me. I still have resources, still have people, still have reach. If this turns into a real war, people get hurt. Maybe not you, maybe not right away, but eventually. Someone you care about. Someone's kid coming home from school. Someone's grandmother buying groceries. Accidents happen, Sullivan. You know that. Grant's jaw clenched. You're threatening them again. No, I'm stating facts. You want to protect these people? Then accept my offer. Let me leave gracefully, and everyone stays safe. What about the federal investigation? I'll handle that. I have lawyers, I have connections. I can make problems go away if I have time and space to work. But not if you're actively sabotaging me. So we have a choice. We can both walk away from this, or we can keep fighting until someone loses everything. Grant was quiet for a long moment, thinking through scenarios and outcomes. If he accepted, Erisa would retreat, at least temporarily. The immediate threat would be gone. Life could return to something like normal, but he'd also be letting a criminal organization continue operating somewhere else, hurting other people in other towns. And he'd have to trust that Erisa would keep her word, which was a dangerous assumption. "No deal," he said finally. Erisa's eyes narrowed. "You're making a mistake. You said that before." "I'm still standing. For now." She dropped her cigarette and ground it out with her boot. "I came here in good faith, offering you a way out. You're refusing. That means what happens next is on you." "What happens next," Grant said quietly, "is that I keep doing exactly what I've been doing. I keep exposing your operation, keep disrupting your business, keep making sure that every day you stay anywhere near this town becomes more expensive than the day before. Eventually, you'll have two choices. Abandon this corridor entirely or go to prison. Those are your only options. You're very confident for someone who's outnumbered and outgunned." "I don't need guns," Grant said. "I just need to be smarter than you. And so far, that's been pretty easy." Erisa's expression hardened. "You know what I think? I think you want this. You want the conflict because it makes you feel alive again. You've been playing house in your little diner, pretending to be normal, but you've been dying inside. And now you finally have an excuse to be who you really are." The words hit closer than Grant wanted to admit. "Maybe you're right," he said. "Or maybe I'm just someone who's tired of watching bad people hurt good ones and not doing anything about it. Either way, the result is the same. You need to leave." Erisa stared at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay, Sullivan. You want war? You've got it. But remember, you chose this." She turned and walked back to her SUV. Before getting in, she called back, "I'll give you credit, Night Reaper. You're everything the stories said you were. Too bad that's not going to be enough." The SUV drove away, leaving Grant alone in the desert with the wind and his thoughts and the growing certainty that he'd just made either the best or worst decision of his life. He pulled out his phone and sent 3 text messages. One to Wesley, "Meeting done. Heading back." One to Agent Chun, "She's not backing down. You need to move faster." And one to a number he'd sworn he'd never contact again. A digital ghost who traded in information and favors. Need everything on Erisa Darnell's personal life. Family, weaknesses, pressure points. "I'm going to war, and I need ammunition." The response came back in seconds. "This will cost you." Grant typed back, "Name your price." Because if Erisa wanted war, he'd give her war. But it would be fought on his terms, with his methods, and it would end with her operation in ruins. The Night Reaper was supposed to be retired. But apparently, retirement only lasted until someone threatened the things that mattered most. Grant drove back to Ashford as the sun began its descent, painting the desert in shades of orange and red. He had work to do, phone calls to make, plans to finalize. And somewhere in all of that, he needed to find a way to explain to Parker, when he finally brought him home, why Daddy's quiet little diner had become the center of something dangerous. But that was a problem for another day. Today, he had a war to plan. And he was very, very good at planning wars. 5 days after the meeting at the water tower, everything came to a head. Grant had spent those days escalating his campaign against Erisa's operation. Every asset she tried to access got flagged. Every shipment she tried to move got mysteriously delayed at checkpoints. Every associate she tried to contact found themselves under increased scrutiny from local law enforcement. He was everywhere and nowhere, a ghost haunting her organization, dismantling it piece by piece. The digital information he'd received about her personal life had been comprehensive, and he'd used it ruthlessly. Her younger brother, trying to go legitimate with a restaurant in Tucson, suddenly faced health inspections and permit reviews. Her accountant found his own accounts frozen pending audit. Her lawyer got disbarred for unrelated ethical violations that Grant had quietly ensured became public knowledge. That it was surgical, methodical, devastating. And it was working. Eris's organization was hemorrhaging money and credibility. Other cartels were already moving into territories she could no longer defend, but Grant knew it couldn't last. Eventually, she'd have to make a move, take a desperate action, lash out at the only target she could definitely reach, him. The attack came on a Tuesday morning. Grant arrived at the diner at his usual time. 4:30 a.m., the world still dark and quiet. He unlocked the back door and stepped inside, flipping on lights, starting the coffee maker, moving through his routine. He was at the prep counter, measuring flour for biscuits, when he heard it. A sound that didn't belong. The soft click of a door latch from somewhere in the dining area. He'd locked that front door himself, which meant someone had picked it. Grant's hand moved smoothly to the knife block, selecting the 8-inch chef's knife. Not his weapon of choice, not even close, but better than nothing. He moved silently toward the kitchen door, listening. There were at least 3 people in the dining room. Maybe more. He could hear their breathing, the subtle creak of boots on old linoleum, the whisper of fabric against fabric. Grant made a calculation. He could try to escape out the back, call for help, let law enforcement handle it. That would be the smart civilian thing to do. But if they'd come for him at the diner, they might also go for the people he cared about. Wesley in his home. Lily in her apartment. Faith in her little house on Oak Street. No. He had to end this here. Now. Grant pushed through the kitchen door fast and low, already moving before his eyes fully adjusted to the darkness of the dining room. He counted 4 shapes, 4 people spread out in standard tactical formation. They were professionals, or at least trained, but they were expecting the diner owner, not the night reaper. Grant moved like water, like shadow, using the layout of his own restaurant as a weapon. He slid between tables, used chairs as obstacles, kept moving so they couldn't get a clean shot or approach. The first man tried to grab him as he passed. Grant redirected the grip, used the man's own momentum to send him crashing into a booth. The second man pulled a gun, but Grant was already inside his reach, striking the wrist hard enough to make him drop the weapon, then following with an elbow to the temple that dropped him like a stone. The third and fourth men were smarter. They spread out, tried to flank him. But Grant had spent 8 years staying alive in situations far worse than this. He grabbed a heavy cast-iron skillet from a wall decoration and threw it at the overhead light, plunging the room into deeper darkness. In the chaos and confusion, he moved, striking precisely at pressure points in joints, using minimal force to maximum effect. Not killing, not permanently injuring, just neutralizing threats. It was over in less than 2 minutes. 4 men down, groaning or unconscious, and Grant standing in the middle of his dark diner breathing hard but unhurt. Then the lights came on. Bright, sudden, blinding. Erisa stood at the light switch by the front door, flanked by 2 more men. And she had a gun pointed directly at Grant. "Impressive," she said. "The stories really didn't do you justice." Grant stood very still, his hands visible, the chef's knife on the floor where he'd dropped it after the last attacker went down. This was a test. Yes, I needed to see if the legend was real or just reputation built on old stories. She smiled. "It's real. You took down 4 trained fighters in the dark without killing any of them. That takes incredible skill and restraint. What do you want, Erisa? I want you to understand something." She gestured around the diner. "You've been dismantling my operation. You've been very clever about it, very thorough. But you made a mistake. You assumed I'd play by rules, that I'd stay in my lane, focus on business, not make things personal." Grant's expression hardened. "What did you do?" "Nothing yet." She pulled out her phone with her free hand and held it up. On the screen was a live video feed. It showed a small house, lights on inside. Through the window, Grant could see a woman, older, gray-haired, moving around a kitchen. And sitting at a table, doing homework, was a small figure. Parker, Grant's blood went cold. "If you hurt them, I won't," Erisa interrupted. "Not if you listen very carefully to what I'm about to say. See, I've realized something. You're too dangerous to fight directly. You're too skilled, too connected, too protected by the moves you've already made. So I'm not going to fight you. I'm going to give you a choice." She lowered her gun slightly, though it still remained pointed in his general direction. "Walk away," she said. "Stop everything you're doing. Stop the federal investigation. Stop freezing my assets. Stop interfering with my business. Do that, and your family stays safe. Your friends stay safe. This town stays safe, and if I don't, then I stop playing nice. Then people start dying. Not you, because that would be too quick, but people around you. Starting with the people in that house in Tucson." Grant looked at the screen, at his son sitting there doing math problems or spelling practice, completely unaware of the danger hovering just outside. His son, who believed his father was just a diner owner, who thought the most dangerous thing Daddy faced was burnt bacon and difficult customers. "You're asking me to choose between stopping you and protecting my son," Grant said quietly. "No. I'm telling you that you can't do both. You're one person. You can't be everywhere. You can't protect everyone. Eventually, you have to prioritize." Erisa's expression was cold, calculating. "So what's it going to be, Night Reaper? Your mission or your family?" Grant stood in his diner, surrounded by unconscious attackers, facing a woman pointing a gun at him, looking at a phone screen showing the only person in the world who truly mattered to him. And in that moment, he understood what Wesley had been trying to tell him. He'd been fighting this battle alone, keeping everyone at arm's length, trying to be both Grant Sullivan and the Night Reaper, trying to protect people while maintaining the distance that had always defined his professional life. But that wasn't working. That wasn't enough. He looked at Erisa and said something that clearly surprised her. "I choose both. That's not an option. It is now." Grant pulled out his own phone. "Because while you've been focused on me, while you've been sending people to attack my diner and surveillance to watch my family, I've been making new friends, or reconnecting with old ones." He tapped his phone once. Erisa's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, confusion crossing her face. The live video feed of Parker's house was still there. But now there was something else. Something new. People moving into position around the house. Not threatening, but securing, protecting. "Those are federal marshals," Grant said. "I called in every favor I had. My son and his grandmother are now under protective custody. They don't even know it yet, but as of 10 minutes ago, they're the safest 2 people in Arizona." Erisa's gun hand tensed. "You're bluffing. Call them. Tell your people watching the house to move in. See what happens." For a long moment, Erisa stared at him. Then she made a call, spoke rapidly in Spanish, listened to the response. Her expression darkened. "Federal agents just arrived at the location," her person on the other end reported. "They're securing the premises. Our surveillance is pulling back." Erisa lowered her phone, her jaw clenched. "Clever, but that only protects 2 people. What about everyone else? What about the old man, the girl at the register, all your regulars?" The diner door opened. Wesley walked in, followed by Jasper. Then Lily, then Faith, then a dozen other people from town, all of them awake at 5 in the morning, all of them standing together. "We heard there might be trouble," Wesley said calmly. "Figured you could use some company." Grant felt something tighten in his chest. His community, his people, standing with him even when it put them at risk. "You can't threaten all of us. Wesley continued, addressing Erisa directly. You can't hurt an entire town without making noise, without drawing attention. And attention is the last thing you want right now, given how many federal agencies are already investigating you. Erisa looked around at all the faces, at the people who had chosen to stand together rather than hide. Her tactical advantage was evaporating. She was outnumbered, exposed, recorded by multiple phones that were certainly capturing this entire interaction. This isn't over, she said. But her voice lacked its earlier certainty. Yes, it is, Grant said firmly. Because here's what's going to happen next. You're going to leave. You're going to pull all your operations out of this corridor. And you're going to disappear before the federal indictments come down. Because they're coming, Erisa. Probably within the week. Agent Chun didn't just review my files, she acted on them. Right now, as we're standing here, operations are being executed against your organization in 4 different states. Erisa's eyes widened. You're lying. His eyes widened. You're lying. Grant's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then turned the screen so she could see. A news alert. Major drug trafficking organization disrupted in multi-state operation. That's you, Grant said quietly. That's your empire collapsing in real time. So you have 2 choices now. You can waste time trying to hurt me, trying to salvage your pride, or you can run. You can disappear while you still can, before they track you down. Erisa stood frozen, her mind visibly racing through options and finding none of them good. Finally, she lowered her gun completely. You win, she said, the words bitter. This time you win. No, Grant replied. We win. He gestured around the room. Because I didn't do this alone. And that's the difference between you and me. You built an empire on fear and control. I built a family on trust and community. Your empire can be destroyed. This, he gestured to the people standing with him, this can't. Erisa looked at him one last time, something almost like respect in her eyes. Then she turned to her men. Let's go. They gathered their injured associates and moved toward the door. At the threshold, Erisa paused. The Night Reaper was feared, she said. But Grant Sullivan? He might be something more dangerous. A man with nothing to lose who found something worth protecting. That's the most dangerous kind of opponent there is. Remember that, Grant said. If you ever think about coming back. She nodded once, then left. The SUVs started and drove away, disappearing into the pre-dawn darkness. For a long moment, nobody in the diner spoke. Then Wesley started clapping, slowly at first, then joined by others, until the whole room was applauding. Grant felt overwhelmed, exhausted, and strangely emotional. Thank you, he said quietly. All of you. That's what family does, Faith said simply. They show up. Lily was crying but smiling. Is it really over? Yes, Grant said. It's really over. His phone rang. Agent Chun, he answered. Sullivan, I don't know what you did, but whatever it was, it worked. We've got simultaneous operations running in Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, and California. We've seized properties, frozen accounts, and arrested 17 people in the last 3 hours. The Dornell organization is done. What about Erisa herself? Still at large. But she's on every watch list now. She won't stay free for long. Grant thanked her and ended the call. He looked around at his diner, at the broken chairs and overturned tables, at the people who had stood with him. Well, he said, I guess I should start making breakfast. It's going to be a long day. And despite everything, despite the violence and fear and tension, people laughed. Because that's what you did after surviving something terrible. You laughed and you made breakfast, and you reminded yourself what you were fighting for in the first place. The sun was rising over Ashford, casting golden light through the diner windows. And for the first time in weeks, Grant Sullivan felt like he could finally breathe. The war was over. And somehow, impossibly, they had won. 2 weeks after the confrontation, life in Ashford began to settle into something resembling normalcy. The black SUVs never returned. News reports confirmed that Heiress Adornell had been arrested attempting to cross into Mexico. Captured by federal agents who had been tracking her movements since the night she left Grant's diner, the investigation revealed the full extent of her operation. And Grant's information had been instrumental in dismantling a network that had operated for nearly a decade. Agent Chun called personally to thank him, though she also warned him that his involvement would remain classified to protect his identity. Grant's place returned to its usual rhythm. The breakfast rush came and went. Wesley took his usual stool. Faith worked on her crosswords. Lily studied for her teaching exams during slow periods. And Bryce had grown more confident in the kitchen, no longer jumping at every sound. But something fundamental had changed. The customers who came in now looked at Grant differently. Not with fear, exactly, but with a kind of reverent respect. They knew he protected them, though most didn't know the full details of how or from what. On a quiet Thursday afternoon, a final black sedan pulled up to the diner. Grant tensed instinctively, then relaxed when he recognized the government plates. Agent Chun stepped out, accompanied by a man in expensive suit who looked like he'd never been within 50 miles of a place like this. They entered, and Grant poured coffee without being asked. "Mr. Sullivan," the man said formally. "I'm Deputy Director Morrison, FBI. I wanted to thank you personally for your assistance in the Dornell case." Grant nodded. "Just protecting my home. You did considerably more than that. Your intelligence led to 37 arrests, the seizure of over $50 million in assets, and the disruption of trafficking routes across 4 states. Morrison paused. "We'd like to offer you a consultant position. Your skills are clearly still sharp, and we could use someone with your particular expertise." Grant looked at the man, then at his diner, at Wesley watching from his stool, at the life he'd built. "I appreciate the offer," Grant said, "but I'm retired. Really retired this time. I've got a business to run and a son to raise. That's enough for me." Morrison studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I understand. But if you ever change your mind, the offer stands." After they left, Wesley approached the counter. "You turned them down." "Yeah. Why?" "You clearly still have the skills. You could do real good working with them." Grant wiped down the counter, that familiar meditative motion. "Because I realized something during all this. The Night Reaper fought alone, solved problems with violence, and disappeared into the shadows. But Grant Sullivan? He's part of something bigger. A community. A family. And that's more important than any mission." Wesley smiled, understanding in his weathered face. "Your boy's coming home this weekend, right?" "Yeah, finally." Grant felt warmth spread through his chest. "I've got a lot to explain to him, but mostly I just want him home. He's lucky to have you." "I'm lucky to have him," Grant corrected. "He's the reason I became someone worth being." That evening, as Grant closed up the diner, he took one last look around. The repaired tables, the patched booths, the countertop worn smooth by years of use. It wasn't fancy, but it was his. And more importantly, it was safe. He locked the door, flipped the sign to closed, and walked to his truck under a sky full of stars. Tomorrow Parker would come home. Tomorrow life would truly return to normal. And Grant Sullivan, once known as the legendary Night Reaper, would go back to being exactly what he'd fought so hard to become. A single dad who made the best biscuits in Arizona and loved his son more than anything in the world. Sometimes, the greatest victory wasn't defeating your enemies. It was protecting what mattered and finding your way home. Parker came home on a Saturday morning, bursting through the diner door with the unstoppable energy of an 8-year-old who'd been away from his father too long. He crashed into Grant with a hug that nearly knocked them both over. "Dad!" Grandma said you had some trouble, but you fixed it. What kind of trouble? Did the oven break again? Did you fight with the health inspector? Grant laughed, holding his son close, breathing the scent of kid shampoo and sunshine. Something like that. But it's all fixed now. Everything's fine. Over the next few weeks, Grant found his rhythm again. Mornings with Parker before school, afternoons at the diner, evenings helping with homework and reading bedtime stories. The simple, beautiful routine of being a parent. But there were moments, quiet moments late at night, when Grant would sit alone and process everything that had happened. He'd pulled out the wooden box one final time, looked at the mask with its embroidered scythe, and made a decision. He burned it. Not out of shame, but out of closure. The Night Reaper was a part of his past that had served its purpose one last time. Now it could rest. Wesley noticed the change in him. "You seem more settled," he observed one morning. "I am," Grant said. "I spent 5 years trying to pretend I was never that person, never the Night Reaper. But that was wrong. I can't erase my past. I can only choose what to do with the skills it gave me." "And what did you choose?" "To use them to protect, not destroy. To build, not tear down. To be someone my son can be proud of, not because I'm ordinary, but because I'm extraordinary in ways that matter." Faith, overhearing the conversation, added her wisdom. "You know what I think? I think heroes aren't people who never make mistakes or never do hard things. Heroes are people who keep choosing good, even when bad would be easier." Grant felt something settle in his chest, a peace he hadn't felt in years. "Thank you, Faith, for everything. For standing with me when you didn't have to." "Oh, honey," she said gently. "We're family. That's what families do." The diner had become more than a business. It was a gathering place, a sanctuary. A reminder that community wasn't just about proximity, but about choosing to show up for each other. Lily graduated from her online teaching program and got a job at the local elementary school. But she kept working weekend shifts at the diner because, as she said, "Some places feel like home." Bryce saved enough money for community college and was planning to study culinary arts. "Because you showed me that cooking isn't just about food," he told Grant. "It's about taking care of people." One quiet evening, after Parker had gone to bed, Grant sat on his sagging porch and called Agent Chun. "How are you settling in?" She asked. "Good, really good, actually. No regrets about turning down our offer." "No regrets about turning down our offer." Grant watched the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "None. I did my time in that world. Now I'm doing something different. Something better. Well, if you ever need anything, you know how to reach me." After hanging up, Grant realized that for the first time since he could remember, he wasn't looking over his shoulder. Wasn't waiting for the next threat. Wasn't wondering when his past would catch up with him. He'd faced it down, integrated it into who he'd become, and emerged not as the Night Reaper or just Grant Sullivan, but as something more complete. A father, a community member, a protector who'd learned that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was stay and build rather than disappear into shadows. The healing wasn't dramatic or instant. It was slow and steady, like dough rising, like relationships deepening, like trust building one day at a time. And that, Grant realized, was exactly how it should be. A year later, Ashford had transformed in subtle but meaningful ways. Grant's place had become something of a local legend, not because of what happened there, but because of what it represented. Ordinary people standing together against extraordinary threats. Other small businesses along Highway 89 began to thrive, no longer paying protection money or living in fear. The community had learned that unity was stronger than any individual threat. Grant received a letter from a small town in New Mexico. Their community was facing similar pressure from criminal organizations, and they'd heard about what happened in Ashford. Could he offer guidance? He could, and did. Not by becoming the Night Reaper again, but by teaching them what he'd learned. Document everything. Build networks of support. Involve federal authorities early. Use legal and financial pressure rather than violence. Over the next several months, Grant quietly consulted with 5 different communities facing similar situations. He never left Ashford, never picked up a weapon, never did anything that would take him away from Parker or the diner. But his strategic mind, his understanding of criminal operations, and his hard-won wisdom helped others protect what mattered to them. Wesley watched this evolution with pride. "You've become a teacher," he observed. "I guess I have," Grant replied. Funny how life works out. Parker, now 9 years old, had grown more confident and thoughtful. He knew something had happened the previous year, something serious that his father didn't talk about in detail. But he also knew that people in town looked at his dad with respect, that their home was safe, and that was enough. One evening, doing homework at the counter while Grant prepped for the next day, Parker asked, "Dad, were you ever a hero?" Grant paused, considering how to answer. "I don't know about hero, but I've tried to do good things when I could. Mr. Wesley says you saved the town. The town saved itself. I just helped a little." Parker thought about this, then returned to his math problems. But before Grant could go back to work, his son added, "I think you're a hero anyway, even if you just make really good pancakes." Grant felt his throat tighten. "Thanks, buddy. That means more than you know." The diner became a model, written about in small journals about community resilience and economic development. Researchers came to study how a small town had resisted organized crime without militarization or violence. Grant always deflected credit to the community, to Wesley's steady presence, to Faith's courage, to everyone who'd stood together. And late at night, when Grant tallied the day's receipts and locked up, he'd think about the path that had brought him here. From the Night Reaper, a ghost that governments paid to disappear, to Grant Sullivan, a single dad making breakfast in Arizona. It wasn't the life he'd planned, but it was the life he'd built, one choice at a time, one day at a time. And that made all the difference. 2 years after Eris's arrest, on a warm spring morning, Grant stood outside his diner watching Parker and his friends ride bikes in the empty parking lot before school. The sign above the door had been repainted, the parking lot repaved, the building itself showing signs of care and investment. Inside, Wesley sat at his usual stool. Older now, but still sharp, still present. Faith worked her crossword. Jasper argued good-naturedly with Lily about whether the breakfast burrito counted as a traditional diner food. Bryce, home from culinary school for the weekend, helped in the kitchen, his skills now far beyond what Grant had taught him. This was what winning looked like, Grant realized. Not dramatic, not glamorous. Just people living their lives without fear, building something together, showing up for each other day after ordinary day. A young woman entered, looking nervous and determined. "Are you Grant Sullivan?" she asked. "I am," he replied, pouring coffee. "What can I do for you?" "My name is Emily. I run a community center in a small town in Utah. We're facing pressure from people who want to take over our building, and I heard you might be able to help." Grant smiled gently. "Sit down. Have some breakfast. And let's talk about how communities protect themselves." As he sat with Emily, sharing strategies and lessons learned, Parker waved goodbye through the window, heading off to school with his friends. Safe, happy, loved. Wesley caught Grant's eye and raised his coffee cup in a silent toast. To survival, to community, to choosing, every single day, to be better than your worst moments. Grant Sullivan had been the Night Reaper once, a legend whispered in fear. But he'd become something more important. A father, a friend, a teacher. A protector who understood that real strength wasn't about what you could destroy, but what you could build and defend. The world might not be perfect, but here, in this small corner of Arizona, in a diner that served the best biscuits and the strongest coffee and the most genuine hospitality, it was a little bit safer, a little bit kinder, a little bit more worth fighting for. And sometimes that was enough. Sometimes that was everything. Before you go, we'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? And what part of Grant's story resonated with you the most? Have you ever had to stand up for something you believed in, even when it was scary? Your thoughts and experiences mean everything to this community. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing so you don't miss the next chapter of these inspiring journeys. Your support helps us keep sharing stories that remind us that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they choose courage over comfort. From all of us here, thank you for spending your time with us today. We're honored to have you as part of our family. Remember, heroism isn't about being fearless. It's about being afraid and choosing to protect what matters anyway. Stay strong. Stand together and never forget that you're capable of more than you know. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload.